may have heard of Nobel laureate Richard Feynman from his learning method, the Feynman Technique. If you're in the physics world, you may have heard of Feynman diagrams. And some of you may have never heard of him at all, and that's all right. Today we're going to be talking about the Feynman Technique. It's a 4-step process that breaks down difficult concepts into their simplest terms. We're going to go through this together through an example of mine that I took when I studied for the CompTIA Security Plus exam. So stick around and let's figure out how to learn more efficiently from the great physicist, Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was born in Queens, New York in 1918. Now, although in most people's definitions he was a genius, he didn't see himself as one. He just saw himself as someone who studied hard. He never let go of his inner child, and that's how he approached the problems he came across. He was a brilliant physicist who contributed to the Manhattan Project, created what became known as the Feynman diagrams in quantum physics, and during his teaching years at Caltech, became known as the Great Explainer. He wasn't a physicist who just understood the subject. He knew how to properly teach and explain the subjects down in such simple terms that people outside of the realm of physics were able to understand what he was talking about. His approach to learning was study hard what interests you most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. Now, even though he mastered calculus by the time he was 15 and created his own mathematical notations, let's take a look at what the Feynman technique really is so that we can become better learners. So there are 4 steps to the Feynman technique. Step 1 is to take a piece of paper and just write the concept you want to learn. Here we're going to use an example I did when studying for the CompTIA Security Plus exam. The topic I chose in particular is network segmentation. I then went into step 2, which is explaining the concept in simple language. I did this in a few different parts. So first I wrote out the definition of what network segmentation is, and then highlighted the key terms within that definition to break down further. I chose to break down what physical network segmentation is and virtual network segmentation is. After writing down the basic definition of network segmentation and highlighting the key terms, I then went into writing out what physical network segmentation is in the ways that best helped me understand. I wrote down a key term within physical segmentation, which is air gapping. I then drew a diagram to better explain in a visual way what that air gap is. As well as pointing out that with physical network segmentation, there's an air gap, I wanted to make sure that when I referred back to this, I understood that we have 2 different physical switches that are completely separated. I also wanted to take note that this breaks down a larger network into individual segments, and that because you are using more pieces of equipment, this may cost more. On the back, I wrote out the second key term of network segmentation, which is virtual network segmentation, also known as logical segmentation. The key term within this was VLANs, which I then wrote out the acronym to be Virtual Local Area Network, and then defining what a VLAN is, as well as another visual example to describe what is being done here. After writing down the basic definition of network segmentation in simple language, I then went into step 3, which is to review and revise. So I went back and in the virtual segmentation piece, I circled layer 3 device and wrote out the key parts of the OSI model that apply here, with layer 1 being physical, layer 2 being data link, layer 3 being network. I wrote down a couple key terms to add context to the visual diagram, saying that VLAN 1 thinks VLAN 2 is on a different switch, so it needs a router in order to talk to each other. I realized that I could expand this definition further with my OSI model and write out examples of hardware that fit into that layer. So layer 1 being cables, layer 2 with your data link being a switch, and then layer 3 being your router. So I've now fully explained and broken down the definition of what is needed for virtual network segmentation. I then went back over to the front with the physical network segmentation and wrote a few other key notes about air gapping. After being satisfied with the notes that I took, I then went into step 4, which is to be able to explain and teach the topic. This can be the hardest part, but also the most rewarding, as it'll show you what parts you really know and what parts you still need to work on, because you need that objective lens to look at your notes and test you if you actually know the topic you're talking about. Now, in my research of the Feynman Technique, I wanted to see what scientific-based evidence there was that pointed to the effectiveness of this learning model. Now, I couldn't find a ton of research on the Feynman Technique in particular, but there is one study that I found really interesting, and I'll link it in the description below so that you can read it for yourself, that took place in the Philippines during the COVID pandemic. They took 3 groups of students from grades 4, 7, and 11 and evaluated them on their English proficiency for their grade. All groups received a pre-test, intervention, and a post-test. Some of the groups received the Feynman Technique, while others received, as a control group, just regular models of instruction. Now, the researchers hypothesized that due to the high level of maturity needed for the Feynman Technique, that the students in grades 4 would perform worse than the students in grade 11 for their respective grades needed for their English proficiency. But this hypothesis was rejected. The results showed that all 3 grade groups saw significant improvement compared to their control group counterparts. So I know this is just one study, but it shows that no matter what grade you're in or how old you are, that the Feynman Technique truly is an effective learning model. So thanks for watching today's video. If you want, subscribe so you can find more videos on how to self-study and become more productive in life.